As of this moment, Lotto Soudal and Cofidis are in serious jeopardy of being relegated from cycling's World Tour at the end of 2022. That would mean that Caleb Ewan would be out of the World Tour if he's still on Lotto Soudal if they get relegated, and therefore not guaranteed to attend any World Tour races, including the Tour de France in 2023. But we're going to have to take a deep dive into the UCI rules here. I'm going to go through which teams are at risk, what they can do to get out of that jam. We've been talking about this ad nauseum on the Lanterne Rouge Cycling podcast. But let's go to the UCI rules, which I've been battling with for the last 2 days. All the World Tour teams are on a license cycle, and they have to apply for licenses for starting the 2023 to 2025 cycle. So there's currently 18 World Tour teams, with Quebecer unfortunately bowing out, plus pro Conti teams may also apply, and the maximum number of licenses that may be issued is 18. The UCI tried to reduce the World Tour teams to 18 teams back in 2020, but they didn't give the teams enough notice. They kind of scrapped it, and this is the first time that a relegation might really happen, and it's still subject, I think, to a bit of scrutiny. And I expect if a team gets relegated, they might appeal to CAS. But if there's more than 18 teams that apply, the UCI assesses them, and whoever gets in or relegated will depend on the application of the sporting criterion in accordance with Articles 2.15.011a, which is the UCI World Ranking for Men for the preceding 3-year period, being 2020, 2021, which we've had those 2 years, and then 2022. And already you can see in this 2.15.011a how many times it's been modified by the UCI over the last 10, 11 years since they've introduced it. So what is that ranking? Because it's not published anywhere. So the ranking is just the cumulative UCI points results from each of those 3 years added together, and then there you go, there's your ranking. But how is that ranking calculated? That ranking is derived from the top 10 best riders under contract with each team at the time of the ranking, and it basically goes on the races in the calendar year. So it's just the top 10 riders, little known fact. So if your 11th rider gets some good results, they won't count to your total at all. And what's really weird, and I think a big problem, and I call on the UCI to publish these rankings, is that the UCI doesn't publish them. They're the exclusive owner of them. They're for internal use only, and they may not be published, but they're used to benchmark and possibly relegate riders or deny their registration with the UCI as a World Tour team. I understand that occasionally the UCI does send to the teams these rankings, but really these should be updated on a weekly basis during the season, and then a final one issued, so that these rankings can be subject to scrutiny, and so that teams know and the public know where teams stand and the riders know where they stand throughout the year or throughout the 3-year cycle. Because the calculation is pretty complicated. I've showed you Raul Banqueri. He's put together this fabulous graph. You can see him on Twitter. But even that is not the official ranking, and there's loads of exceptions, like if a rider's been transferred, like Biniam Girmay went from Delco to Intermarché. Well, Intermarché don't get his points from before he transferred. Riders who ended their contract, like Miguel Angel Lopez, if he'd ridden for Astana or something or retired, Movistar wouldn't have got his points afterwards. But it gets even more complicated with trainees. Lucas Plapp, the young Ineos talent, the Australian, it says that points obtained by him during his trainee period, which he was on at Ineos at the end of this year, go to his usual team. Well, he didn't have a usual road team. He was in the Australian track program, and they don't get added to Ineos. So he actually picked up 85 UCI points at the World Championships U23 individual time trial, which is a fair amount of points. And then with dev riders, it gets even more complicated. For example, Finn Fisher-Black, who was on Jumbo-Visma development, his points, if he goes to ride for the main Jumbo-Visma team, count only to his development team, even though he's riding in the main Jumbo-Visma team. Now, he's subsequently gone to UAE, but his points obtained at Andalusia and at the Baloise Belgium Tour, where he actually picked up like 100 UCI points on GC, where he came fourth, don't count to Jumbo-Visma. Now, they don't need the points, but for other smaller teams, the ones that I've just showed you in this list that are in the fight, which is 6 or 7 teams, this is a big disincentive to bringing on trainees or bringing up riders from the development team, because any points they gain don't count to your team. But what makes it even more complicated is that you see Cofidis and Lotto in this red relegation zone here, which means they would be out in 2023 if they don't move up a spot over the other teams. What I don't know and is not clear in the rules is what if Alpecin Phoenix don't apply for World Tour status? Are they forced to? I don't see how the UCI could force Alpecin to become a World Tour team, and Alpecin are reaping all the benefits. They're in a better position than Ineos, than the best, or not Ineos, Deceuninck Quickstep, the best World Tour teams. Alpecin get invited to every race. They can cherry pick the races they want to go to. And if they don't want to go to a race that's a World Tour race where there's no marketing benefit or the riders don't suit it, they don't have to. They can run a smaller squad, target races. And go to all the big ones like the Grand Tours and the Monuments. They're in a great position. So why would they apply for World Tour status when that comes with a whole host of additional fees, contributions to anti-doping, etc. to the UCI? Now, Arkea Samsic will definitely apply according to their management, and if you look at the riders they've signed, it looks like they're going for it as well. So that's one team, but I don't know whether it's two teams that might get relegated from World Tour or one, because those two Pro Conti teams are right now above Cofidis and Lotto Soudal, and I don't see Total Energy making up enough points on those two teams anyway. So that's one to watch as well. And right now you're probably thinking, well, how many points are allocated to certain events? I assume the Tour de France stages are like huge points allocation and other smaller races aren't. I swear you're wrong, buddy. The Tour de France, obviously GC at World Tour stage races, if you see here, GC pays well. If you come sort of 7th or 8th on GC at a World Tour stage race, you get a nice chunk of points, like 7th at, let's pick a race. Tour de Suisse is 150 UCI points, which is more than a Tour de France stage win, which is 120 UCI points. And what's even crazier, 7th at Bretagne Classic gives you 120 points, the same as a Tour de France stage win. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head who came 7th at Britannia Classic this year. I can remember the first three just about, but 7th, same as the Tour de France stage win in terms of UCI points. There is an incredibly heavy overweighting to one-day races at all levels, and stage wins or stage results in stage races, you can see for yourself here, have an incredibly low weighting. At, say, Criterion de Dauphiné, there are 0 UCI points if you come 4th or 5th on a stage. There are 8 points if you come 3rd in a Binkback Tour stage or at Basque Country. You see the level of Basque Country? I think 3rd on one of the stages there is incredibly difficult to do. And even the Tour de France, 5th on a stage or 4th, 15th. Like, sometimes these are the best results of riders' careers. And conversely, when we go down to the Pro Series and Class 1 events, one-day races, you can see that winning a 1.1 race, which is like Trofeo, Mattioti, Circuit de Volony, Tour de Finestre, and some smaller races like Trofeo Alcudia, or all the Mallorcan Challenge races, smaller races than that, they give 5 more points than a Tour de France stage win. Now, I'm not going to go into too much about how broken this system is. It is evidently broken. Obviously, many World Tour DS and managers of sort of the mid-ranked teams who get good results in stage races will not be happy with this point allocation, which heavily weights it to one-day races in the 1-1, 1.pro category. They are the Moneyball sweet spot races you want to be going towards. And for these teams in the relegation battle, which I consider to be everyone pretty much below Groupama, which is DSM, EF, Azure Desert, Citroën, Bike Exchange, Movistar, ISN, Intermarché, Arkea, Cofidis, Lotto Soudal, Arkea are already Pro Conti, they need to be targeting the right races to accumulate the most points, otherwise they are at serious risk of relegation. And you can already see certain teams like Intermarché signing Christoph. We spoke about it on the podcast for their preview. It's a very targeted signing because he can accumulate a lot of points at races like GP de Denain, where 4th, Hugo Hofstetter, Arkea Samsic, they've picked him up because they see his points, 100 points, which is more than 2nd place at a Tour de France stage in this 1.pro race, which there are a plethora of. You can see Intermarché and Arkea focusing on this, and I seriously worry about Lotto Soudal, who are deep in the fight for their survival, because often, and the Inner Ring published a very good article on this points race recently, where they said sponsorship for a World Tour team is often contingent upon that World Tour team retaining World Tour status or going to the Tour de France. And if that's removed from Lotto Soudal, their ability to go to the Tour or be in World Tour, I worry about their survival. And for Caleb Ewan, who just signed a 3-year, I think, extension at Lotto Soudal, I hope that his agent and he put in a clause in that contract that if Lotto Soudal get relegated, he is released from his contract unless he's happy to not race as many World Tour races if they get relegated. That's why I tweeted today that Caleb Ewan should just do Milano Sanremo, one-day race, huge amount of points, and he usually comes top 5. He gets over the Poggio at worst. He should also do the Tour de France because at the end of the day, you still got to go to the Tour and keep the sponsors happy and try and get results there. But otherwise, no .pro stage races for him. Lotto Soudal need to be focusing on getting as many points as possible. Cofidis as well, I assume, with the signing of Chimolaya, thinking something similar. But I think this is such a big deal. It's going to blow up at the end of 2022 when teams realize and the public realizes, holy shit, these two teams or one team might be getting relegated. And so my company in the background has actually been putting together spreadsheets, lists of riders out of contract who are available right now, and also how teams should approach this season, all the teams in the fight for relegation or survival right now. So if any of those teams actually want any assistance with it, feel free to reach out. You can hit me up on Twitter or send me an email. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know if you knew this was a thing in World Tour, the relegation battle. Who do you think is going to stay up? I think Israel are looking pretty good with the signing of Nizzolo and Full, saying those guys should bring a lot of points, and they had a much better year this year. DSM, on the other hand, going in reverse. So maybe if they have another bad year, they could be in real trouble. But until the next one, ciao.